On the French Riviera, Russian oligarchs have long reigned. For years, they have been buying up some of the most beautiful properties in the world. In Cap d'Antibes, the Château de la Croix belongs to the famous Roman Abramovich, the former owner of Chelsea Football Club, with an estimated price of 120 million euros. In Villefranche-sur-Mer, the villa Nelcote, owned by Viktor Rashnikov, a steel tycoon, is said to be worth between 110 and 150 million euros. In Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, the Villa Chabon and the Luceto were sold in 2008 to Alexander Ponomarenko, the owner of the Moscow International Airport, for more than 80 million euros. But since the invasion of Ukraine and European sanctions, the oligarchs have become pariahs. Éric Rollin knows them well in Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat. He is the boss of a security company which watches over their incredible villas.
Toute cette avenue, c'est tout pratiquement des oligarques russes. Vous voyez, les clôtures sont très hautes. C'est des clôtures de protection. Ils peuvent faire aussi leur soirée tranquillement et vivre leur vie sans être vus. Comme ils disent ici, vivons cachés, vivons heureux.
The Russian owners now own 2/3 of the peninsula.
Aujourd'hui, sur une rue, il y a peut-être 3 propriétaires qui se partagent une dizaine de villas. Ils vont prendre une résidence pour leurs amis, pour leur garde du corps, tout leur personnel de service. Donc il leur faut bien souvent 2-3 villas à côté de la principale.
But since the European sanctions, the shutters are closed in the billionaires' villas. As a result, Eric's company has lost about 20 large contracts worth several $100,000.
Ici, vous êtes à la villa Sochana, qui appartient à un oligarque russe très, très connu du premier cercle de Poutine. Elle a été gelée par les sanctions économiques.
This villa belongs to Arkady Rotenberg, Vladimir Putin's friend and judo partner, whose fortune is estimated at $2.3 billion, mainly in construction. Until a few months ago, Eric and his agents were responsible for the security of the property, but since the sanctions were put in place, the billionaire no longer pays his bills and his accounts have been frozen. However, on the other side of the gate, Eric sees a competitor.
Certains oligarques, dont lui, dit qu'il ne peut pas nous payer puisqu'il est sanctionné. On m'aperçoit que je viens de voir qu'il y a un véhicule de sécurité à l'intérieur. D'où vient l'argent? Comment il les paye? Je crois que c'est un collègue, en plus je le connais peut-être lui.
On leaving the premises, he comes across a vehicle from the new company that has replaced him.
Yeah, je le connais, ouais, je le connais. Vous voyez, il se cache. Donc il a dû appeler des renforts pour signaler ma présence.
He decides to call them and ask for an explanation.
Ouais, c'est moi que t'as croisé tout à l'heure sur la route.
Ah, c'était toi?
Ouais, c'est moi qui suis avec des journalistes. Mais tu m'as fui, t'as peur?
Ah non, faut pas que tu fasses venir des journalistes.
Ah non, mais je les fais venir, tu sais pourquoi?
Non.
Bah parce que quand même, j'ai pas été payé, donc voilà.
Ok.
D'ailleurs, on se posait la question, comment il fait pour être payé ton boss?
Moi, j'en occupe pas ça.
Ah. Ouais.
Ok, bon, bah,
écoute,
je te laisse.
Je te laisse, je te souhaite
Salut.
bon courage. Ciao.
Salut.
Vous l'avez entendu? Je ne sais pas comment ils font pour être payés. C'est encore une histoire extraordinaire de Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat.
Eric suspects that his competitor is being paid through obscure channels that circumvent European sanctions. The company refused to answer our questions.
Faut essayer de rappeler, mais bon, on ne donne pas d'informations. Si j'ai des ordres, je peux pas. Il y a des choses que je peux rien faire. Je suis désolé. Hein.
It's impossible to know more, but for a few months now, the new owners of the security company that took Eric's place have been Belarusians. To date, the total amount of the oligarchs' assets frozen in Europe amounts to 17 billion euros. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, more than 1,200 people have been placed under EU sanctions.
we will work to prohibit Russian oligarchs from using their financial assets on our markets.
These oligarchs, who the President of the European Commission speaks about, are all close to Vladimir Putin. They are regularly summoned to the Kremlin to receive instructions.
Я уверен, мы будем действовать как партнеры в интересах развития страны.
Ultra-powerful businessmen, they are now accused of supporting and financing the war in Ukraine. Oil, gas, banks, the oligarchs own everything.
Рояль фірми Stanway Sons. Їх всього випущено було 25 штук. Це лімітована серія.
By attacking their assets in Europe and freezing their bank accounts, the European Union is convinced that this pressure on the oligarchs and Vladimir Putin will lead Russia to back down. But getting hold of what they really own is often complicated. Some yacht owners have tried to escape sanctions.
Si on était arrivé 2 heures plus tard, ce serait trop tard.
So, to help investigators, specialized units composed of experts in white-collar crime are being set up all over Europe. In Kiev, a group of young Ukrainians tracked down the oligarchs from a bomb shelter.
Some people could be connected to Russian aggression or to, for example, to a war propaganda.
A painstaking task, as in order to conceal their true identity, the oligarchs often use pseudonyms and cascades of shell companies.
Les techniques utilisées par ces oligarques russes sont les mêmes techniques utilisées depuis des années par la mafia, par les trafiquants de drogue.
We want to investigate Cyprus, an island popular with oligarchs for laundering their billions.
Someone is looking after you. Amigo, any problem?
And Finland, a country where a Russian arms dealer was able to buy a strategic island which threatens the security of the country.
Siitä käsi on helppo tehdä erilaisia vaikka erikoisoperaatioita niin vesistöllä kuin maa-alueella.
Dirty money, racketeering, torture. Vladimir Putin and the oligarchs have set up a formidable system.
Те, кто отказывается с ними работать, отправляются в тюрьму и там погибают.
Indeed, since the beginning of the Ukrainian crisis, about 15 businessmen have died under strange circumstances.
C'est vrai que moi j'ai très peur pour lui.
For several months, we investigated these oligarchs close to the Kremlin. Do they really have the power to influence the Russian president? Or are they just pawns for his ambition? Our investigation into the oligarchs and the Ukrainian crisis begins in the suburbs of Kiev. Several Ukrainian oligarchs close to the Russian government are said to have helped the master of the Kremlin to prepare his attack. Maxim is a journalist at Radio Liberty who has been investigating one of Putin's men in Ukraine for several years.
Медведчук є тією людиною, яка була прямим агентом впливу на території України інтересів Кремля.
Viktor Medvedchuk is what one might call a Trojan horse of Russian power.
Оцінками аналітиків, розвідки, саме Медведчук давав Путіну інформацію стосовно того, яка є ситуація в Україні. Іноді ця інформація була навіть перебільшеною, тому що він говорив про те, що українці зустрічатимуть російські танки із квітами.
At the time of our filming, the oligarch was arrested and imprisoned. To complete his investigation, Maxim received permission to enter his last property, a stunning estate of several hectares. Viktor Medvedchuk is very close to Vladimir Putin. The Russian president is godfather to his daughter. In addition to being a businessman who made a fortune in energy and agriculture, the Ukrainian oligarch was a very active member of parliament.
Смотрите, я не считаю Россию в данной ситуации агрессором.
This notorious pro-Russian has denounced his country's rapprochement with the European Union for years, and he was particularly keen to see greater economic integration between Ukraine and Russia.
Це туди, так?
To avoid looting, his property is now guarded by armed men belonging to the Ukrainian Territorial Defense.
І охорони тут теж не було на території.
Була внутрішня, ну вікна.
Maxim goes straight to the back of the house, where the oligarch has hidden his latest toy.
О, тут ціла залізнична станція.
Ну, тут на станція.
This car can't move. It's a replica of an Oriental Express car.
Ми зараз знаходимося біля славнозвісного золотого вагона. За однією з версій це подарунок дружини Медведчука Оксани Марченко, Віктору Медведчуку.
The oligarch's wife is said to have spent 8 million on this little gem.
Так, це бар.
Calling upon the best craftsmen.
Я маю на увазі, що тут все ручна робота. То вирізається, монтовується, потім зашліфовується.
Ага.
Almost everything is gold inside the carriage. Even the toilets.
Ну, по-перше, все у дереві, а по-друге, все по золоті. Я в таких туалетах до цього не бував. Я вражений тим, наскільки це...
Бачиш, включається автоматично.
Наскільки це масштабно і наскільки це виглядає дорого. При тому, що ми країна далеко не найбагатша.
In the bar, where a half-empty bottle of champagne is still lying around, a small detail catches the journalist's eye.
Це склянки із золотого вагону Медведчука. Тут є герб Російської Федерації, що, в принципі, логічно, бо проросійський політик навряд чи тут розмістив би символіку Українського чи Європейського Союзу, чи ще щось.
The most important detail is that the sugar cubes date from the Soviet era.
45 копійок коштував цукор Радянського Союзу. Це раритет. Я не знаю, в якому він стані, чи можна його взагалі вживати.
The only modern touch is in the private lounge of the carriage.
У нас телевізор є. Дуже не здивований, а больно було, наскільки нашу країну граблять. От і все. Бо це все бюджети. Це все наші податки, бюджет.
Далі.
От тому їх ніхто не карає, і вони себе так от поводять.
Viktor Medvedchuk's property is said to have cost 100 million euros and even has its own heliport, but its construction was interrupted at the beginning of the war. Maxim enters the gigantic building for the first time. This small castle is more than 2,000 square meters and has about 100 rooms.
У мене є план цього будинку. От у мене тут співпадає. Отут сходи, вони є. З лівої сторони оце їдальня. Це басейн, і басейн теж не закінчили.
This monumental swimming pool is surrounded by marble columns. The decoration is in an antique style. Next door, the fitness room was also to be covered in marble. This property is now being seized by the Ukrainian authorities. How did the oligarch amass all this wealth? In an office in Kiev, Antonina from the Anti-Corruption Center has been investigating the oligarch's money for months. According to her, part of Viktor Medvedchuk's fortune came from Russia, in particular thanks to an oil refinery bought at knockdown prices.
Тут цікавий момент того, що ця значна частка цього заводу, який коштує мільйони доларів, була отримана менше ніж за $40 тисяч.
This refinery, which regularly pays him large sums of money,
$3,6 мільйонів,
was a simple gift from the Kremlin. He financed Russian propaganda in Ukraine with these millions.
Цей завод платив їм дивіденди на їхні кіпрські компанії, а вже далі ці кошти з кіпрських компаній надходили в Україну і витрачалися для того, щоб купувати телеканали, купувати люксові активи та ті активи, які були потрібні саме цим персонам.
At the end of 2013, in the center of the Ukrainian capital, Viktor Medvedchuk established 3 pro-Russian television channels. They were installed in this building before their closure by President Zelensky in February 2021.
Все украинские зрители, особенно украинские дети, никогда не увидят по телевизору при Зеленском, как и при Порошенко, трое из Простоквашино.
The broadcasting stopped abruptly. One man has been denouncing the propaganda broadcast by these 3 TV channels for years in a program broadcast on social media. Ruslan is the presenter and editor of Stop Fakes.
The purpose of these 3 TV networks was to make our society weaker, to split Ukrainian society, to persuade that the Ukrainian government is the most corrupted government in the world, that Ukraine state failed, that Nazi and fascists are in power in Ukraine, that Ukrainian government is controlled from Washington.
For example, the channel ZIK tried to make the Ukrainian health minister Ulana Zuprum look pro-Nazi.
They even presented kind of an evidence. Oh, look, this is Ms. Suprum's grandfather, and he is in the Nazi uniform, and he was a guard in 2 Nazi concentration camps in Poland. So we find the real picture of Ms. Suprum's grandfather, and it's a different person. So for us, it was a very clear signal that they did it intentionally. They deliberately produced and disseminated fakes.
Making Ukrainians look like Nazis is the basis of the Kremlin's propaganda. In Russia, on the Rossiya 1 channel, the famous pro-Putin journalist Vladimir Solovyev, currently under European sanctions, hammers it home in his cult show.
Вы виновны в смерти поляков, евреев, русских и
On set, he doesn't hesitate to call upon his only Ukrainian guest, a Nazi.
Я говорю, нет, не смей трогать память погибших 9 миллионов. 9 миллионов. Не смей трогать их память. Ты упырь нацистский. Не надо говорить гадости. Пшел вон. Пшел отсюда вон. Собрался и вон отсюда.
When they try to persuade their population that Ukrainians are Nazis, they want Russians hate Ukrainians. In this case, this war that Putin and Kremlin staged will be supported by Russian population. And you can do whatever you want with Nazis. That's what we saw in Bucha. When they came, they raped people, they raped children, they killed civilians, because for them, all Ukrainians represent Nazis.
For Ruslan, Viktor Medvedchuk is partly responsible for these atrocities.
I don't know if Viktor Medvedchuk wanted to fuel the war, but I'm sure that it was part of his responsibility of what we have right now.
The Ukrainian government was aware of the threat, and 9 months before the beginning of the conflict, they decided to put Viktor Medvedchuk under house arrest in his villa in the center of Kiev. But when the war broke out, he disappeared. The Ukrainian Secret Service searched for him for 48 days before finding him hidden in a property he was renting under another name. The oligarch was about to flee to Russia, disguised as a Ukrainian soldier. For President Volodymyr Zelensky, this was a big catch.
Пропоную Російській Федерації обміняти цього вашого хлопця на наших хлопців і наших дівчат, які зараз в російському полоні.
This neighbor witnessed his arrest.
Вони їздили, шукали з якимось таким великим, як ноутбук чи що, апаратом, який вибиває інформацію, соцзв'язі, тобто, все бачать вони. Вони і нас знайшли, і машини знайшли, які там десь вони були у нас тут по місцю розкидані, його майбахи.
Viktor Medvedchuk was accused of high treason and faced up to 15 years in prison. But on the 22nd of September, Volodymyr Zelensky put his word into action, exchanging Putin's allies and 50 Russian soldiers for 200 Ukrainian prisoners, including fighters from the Azovstal factory.
Обміняли одного фаната Росії на 200 воїнів. Віддати Медведчука за справжніх воїнів не шкода.
To take control of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin was also counting on another oligarch. According to an investigation by the Washington Post, which had access to secret FSB documents, Ukraine's pro-Russian former president, Viktor Yanukovych, was also expected to make a comeback in the event of a military victory. The man was ousted from power in 2014 during the pro-European Mayan Revolution.
Нові подробиці втечі Януковича. В інтернеті з'явилося відео з камер спостереження, які...
As seen in this CCTV footage, before flying to Moscow, the pro-Russian former president and his men took as many valuables as possible with them. We managed to gain exceptional access into Yanukovych's house, located in the suburbs of Kiev. The oligarch has been under European sanctions since the 8th of August, allegedly embezzling between $10 and $40 billion. The Ukrainian Territorial Defense confiscated his property in 2014. Inside, we find unimaginable luxury. The building and its annexes cover over 3,400 square meters. All the furniture is rare antiques. Petro, who just returned from the front lines, guided us on our visit.
Рояль фірми Steinway Sons. Їх всього випущено було 25 штук. Це лімітирована серія. Це номер 2 з 25. З копією автографа Джона Леннона. В кого номер 1, важко сказати, є більш два варіанти. Або у Путіна, або був у Каддафі. Квіточки в нас живі всі. І під квітами горшки. По кутиках під віконцями обклеєні зміїною шкірою. Тут у нас ще одна столова. Тут у нас в столовій коври шовкові.
To avoid scratching the floor or damaging the carpets, Petro puts on overshoes.
Вартість ручна робота, вартість коврика десь від 200 тисяч євро. Від 200 і більше. 26 квадратних метрів має коврик. Не менше 4 років робиться такий коврик. А тут у нас є музична скринька. Корпус. На кришці пише, який номер валика, диска, який має на собі мелодії. Зараз включу, буде і грати валик номер 3. Музична скринька сучасна. Скриньок таких було випущено 20 штук, зроблено в Швейцарії. Це номер 16. І він сказав, що за неї було заплачено 460 тисяч.
Each floor is served by a lift.
Індивідуальний ліфт. Ексклюзивний, один в своєму роді. Другий раз ніхто не повторить.
On the top floor, the oligarch had a small Orthodox chapel built, covered with gold leaf and semi-precious stones. Next door is the oligarch's room, and a little further on is his mistress's room. She was one of his servants.
Це в нас коханка Януковича. Люба Поліжай, яка вийшла з прислуги.
Another surprise. In this dressing room, one of the doors opens onto a secret passageway 118 meters long. This is Yanukovych's private access to his spa. Inside, all the equipment is state-of-the-art.
Соляріум і кріосауна. Тут в кімнаті киснева капсула і надувна обгортуюча ванна. Ну, для підняття імунітету трошки, добре для оздоровлення організму – це добре. Дуже ті люди хочуть жити, тільки вони трошки заблуджуються, що треба попереживати про населення.
The oligarch also had a bowling alley and a gym with a boxing ring installed.
Янукович хронічний алкоголік, тому до спорту дуже мало він має відношення. Він там трошки щось і грав в теніс, але...
Only one witness to the oligarch's opulent lifestyle is still on site.
Тут у нас є малукський какаду, ще бачив Янукович. Він йому був дорослим пійманий. Це приклад контрабанди. Бо таких тварин не можна вивозити. Для них нема законів.
For the maintenance and operation of this gigantic property, which covers 340 acres, the oligarchs spend $4 million each month. Today, only the park is open to the public, and despite the war, on sunny days, hundreds of Ukrainians come to walk around. These properties, owned by oligarchs, seized in Ukraine or frozen in Europe, are only the tip of the iceberg. All have other assets scattered around the world, but finding them requires considerable effort. In the center of Lviv, a city of 700,000 inhabitants in the west of Ukraine, Radio Liberty journalists are relentlessly tracking down oligarchs' assets. Kirill has just made a surprising discovery about two anodyne photos received by email. The first depicts a bouquet of flowers in a vase, the second a general view of London. These two images were taken from the private Instagram account of the daughter of an oligarch.
Так, від цього ми почали пошук можливої нерухомості і за допомогою таких gurading, оскільки на фотографіях були досить відомі частини Лондону, так, ну, наприклад, Лондон Ай, Вестмінстерське аббатство, і за допомогою gurading ми можемо буквально відтворити краєвид, який був на фотографії, яку виклала донька цього олігарху. Це ось такий от будинок, який знаходиться в одному з найдорожчих районів Лондона.
Kirill can identify the exact flat by the wallpaper patterns behind the vase.
Тут це сайт з продажу нерухомості, де ми бачимо шпалери в відбитті в дзеркалі, відображені. В них такий узор специфічний. Да, маленькі деталі, ну, вони завжди грають важливу роль у доказах таких речей, як власність нерухомості, наприклад.
An application to the British authorities will confirm that the owner is Kristina Ponomarenko and that the value of the flat is 5 million euros. Kristina Ponomarenko is the daughter of Alexander Ponomarenko, a Russian billionaire currently under sanctions, who owns Moscow International Airport and is worth 2.4 billion euros.
Ну, я точно не знаю, бо родина в неї досить заможня, тому, а вже ж вона могла купити, але те, що в неї статки можуть бути завдяки батьку, це також ми не виключаємо.
Enforcing sanctions against oligarchs is often a headache for the authorities. Luxury yachts are a classic favorite toy for oligarchs. 1 in 4 of the world's yachts over 100 meters in length belongs to a Russian. The biggest of them all is the Dilbar, which is 156 meters long and costs 600 million euros. It's owned by billionaire Alisher Usmanov, whose fortune is estimated at 13.4 billion. As soon as the sanctions were announced, many yacht owners tried to avoid having their toys confiscated. In the south of France, without the rapid intervention of customs, the French Riviera, a yacht valued at 130 million euros, would have fled to international waters. Eric Salle led the entire immobilization operation in the port of La Ciotat.
C'était vraiment une question d'heures avant que ce yacht quitte les eaux françaises, puisqu'il avait reçu l'ordre par son propriétaire de partir très rapidement. Et si on avait attendu la matinée, le bateau était en dehors des eaux territoriales françaises, donc hors de portée de l'administration pour le contrôler et puis le saisir comme il est aujourd'hui.
The owner of this 86-meter-long yacht is Igor Sechin, an ally to Vladimir Putin who considers himself his right-hand man. Sechin is also the CEO of the oil giant Rosneft. Like Igor Sechin, many Russian oligarchs ordered the captains of their yachts to leave European waters as soon as possible.
Début mars, on s'est aperçu que dans la Méditerranée, les navires qui venaient en Italie, en Espagne ou en France pendant la saison estivale ont fait demi-tour tout d'un coup. Donc ils ont fait demi-tour, ils ont pris le soin de passer très proche de la Tunisie pour éviter les eaux européennes et ensuite continuer leur navigation en passant au sud de la Grèce pour ensuite aboutir jusqu'en Turquie où ils se sont mis en sécurité.
This is the case of My Solaris, a yacht estimated at 500 million euros, which belongs to the Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich. The route of the ship showed that its captain made sure to bypass the border of Greek waters to seek safety in Bodrum, Turkey, a country that doesn't apply sanctions. In their escape, several yachts have even turned off their identification system, which is mandatory to prevent collisions at sea.
En Méditerranée, on a quand même une route maritime importante qui passe dans ces secteurs. Donc avoir des navires d'une taille importante qui n'émettent aucune information, c'est quand même un peu inquiétant.
To date, France has immobilized 6 yachts, 6 helicopters and 62 properties. A modest figure, but investigators often come up against major obstacles. Most of these Russian oligarchs' assets belong to secretive offshore companies based in tax havens. Since the fall of the USSR in 1991, Cyprus and its economic capital Limassol have been a favorite. The island has even become a hub for laundering their billions. In Limassol, the Russian community represents a quarter of the inhabitants. They have their own supermarket and an Orthodox church. Even though we are several thousand kilometers from Moscow, criticizing the war in Ukraine is still difficult.
Если Бог это попустил, значит для чего-то это надо, правда?
The priest is very embarrassed by our questions.
Вы против войны или вы за войну?
Я за мир.
Вы против спецоперации или против войны, потому что русские не называют?
Я за мир.
Like many of his peers, the cleric doesn't dare to utter the word war. In Cyprus, there are only a few dozen Russians who have the courage to demonstrate against the Kremlin's policies.
Peace for Ukraine! Freedom for Russia! War! Peace! Stop! Putin! Stop! Freedom! War! Stop!
In protest, Anatoly and the rest of the group decided to change the colors of the Russian flag.
We removed the red stripe as a symbol of blood, empire, tyranny. So we needed some symbol, and this is the symbol we found.
Very few Russians dare to protest due to the number of oligarchs that work on the island.
For sure, we know there is huge Russian money here, and not only it's a business, it's really oligarchs who work for Putin, KGB, and many Cyprians don't want to see it, but being true, they know that this is corrupted money. And a lot of Cypriot rich families got their richness, their money from this corruption. And this is the negative side of Cyprus.
Indeed, almost all the oligarchs close to the Russian president have opened dozens of shell companies on the island. Like Eduard Kudainatov, a Russian billionaire under sanction who is said to be worth $2 billion and who made his fortune in oil. This oligarch is said to be one of Vladimir Putin's top allies. He is said to own the Scheherazade, a 140-meter-long mega yacht, estimated to be worth more than 600 million euros, which is suspected to belong to the Russian president. We decided to go to the address of one of Eduard Kudainatov's companies. Much to our surprise, it's in the suburbs of Limassol, in this house, which doesn't look like much.
You got an address and it's...
Yes, what do you want?
Is it here?
Is the correct address here?
Ah, it's okay. Correct. Antrula is she's the director of the company?
Yes, and?
Because we would like to talk.
The director isn't here, but the woman who opened the door knows her very well.
And you are her mother?
Yes.
Ah.
2 hours later, Andrula calls us back and confirms that she works for Eduard Kudainatov's company.
I am the director and I am the accountant also of this company.
Okay.
You can send me an email, my email address, and I will arrange to answer you until tomorrow morning.
In the end, Andrula refused to answer our questions. On the website that references Cypriot companies, we noticed that Andrula Tsikou is the director or secretary general of dozens of other companies. At Transparency International, Sarah Brimbeux, a specialist in illicit financial flows, is familiar with the practice of directors collecting companies.
Quand on retrouve un directeur sur plusieurs dizaines, voire centaines de sociétés, en fait, on appelle ça un homme de paille. Et un homme de paille n'a pour finalité que celle de cacher l'identité du propriétaire réel des richesses qu'il souhaite cacher ou de l'origine de ces fonds. Il faut préciser un chiffre, c'est que le recours à des sociétés écrans, à des hommes de paille, on le retrouve dans 70% des cas de corruption.
As for shell companies, registered by the dozen at sometimes surprising addresses, this is also a trademark of financial crime.
Les techniques utilisées par ces oligarques russes sont les mêmes techniques utilisées depuis des années par la mafia, par les trafiquants de drogue, par certains dirigeants étrangers corrompus, par des hommes d'affaires qui ont fait des affaires un petit peu louches. C'est des schémas classiques. On empile en effet les sociétés jusqu'à plusieurs dizaines, on dépasse parfois les centaines. Ça crée un nuage qui est quasiment impénétrable.
Headed by frontmen, these front companies are used by the oligarchs to buy luxury goods all over the world in total discretion. Cyprus offered another advantage until 2020, which the oligarchs took full advantage of. In exchange for an investment of 2.5 million euros, the island issued a Cypriot passport, giving rights throughout the European Union. Marina Amafi, Eduard Kudainatov's wife, obtained Cypriot citizenship in exchange for the purchase of 2 houses located in this private building complex. Inside, almost none of the villas are inhabited. The pool is deserted. We don't see any Russians, even though it's peak season. After several minutes, we finally found the owner and showed him a picture of the couple.
This guy, I definitely only in here for 2.5 years. I suppose he wasn't here. But what about she? No, she's like a sample. A lot of Russians could look like that.
Very quickly, the man confirms the purpose of this complex.
This complex was built by Russian investors. You know, frankly speaking, those houses were for passport. But the quality of the armor is bullshit, really. Someone is looking after you. Amigo, any problem?
Our presence disturbs the peace, and although we're inside the property of a private individual who agrees to talk with us, a security guard from the complex asks us to leave.
You know must be there. His aim is private. No, but his aim is boss to move. Immediately.
In fact, the criteria for obtaining their passports was entirely ignored. Marios Petridis works at the Cypriot Court of Audit, which has just published a damning report.
We could see that over half of them were given in an illegal way. We mean that they did not meet the naturalization criteria.
According to the report, the authorities turned a blind eye to many illegal cases that should have been rejected.
We found some notes of the Ministry of Interior officers that maybe this person is involved in money laundering. Maybe this person is a politically exposed person in his country. Maybe this person is having sanctions against him.
Igor Kezaev is one of the oligarchs with a dubious reputation and who managed to obtain a passport, a man worth 3 billion euros who is currently under sanctions. A confidential investigative report by the Cypriot authorities outlines the oligarch's suspicious profile. Reports of close links between Igor Kezaev and politically sensitive people whom he bribes with his associates to facilitate their activities. Igor Kezaev is the main shareholder of an arms factory that supplies the Russian army in Ukraine. The Cypriot passport would have been used to help the Russian Secret Service. To conduct his business, the oligarch also owns several shell companies in Cyprus, some of which are located in this building.
Do you know Igor Kezaev, the boss of the owner of the company? This guy?
What exactly you need?
Yeah, we are journalists and we are...
This
No,
guy
he's not.
is just the registered address. Here we have like more than 800 companies.
This office is in fact a law firm that hosts hundreds of companies.
Provide you any information to you regarding our work, regarding our company, regarding visa, if under sanction, if no, if we know, if we don't know.
With this heavy record, Igor Kezaev should never have obtained this European passport. Yet it is thanks to it that he can buy a strategic island without any controls in Finland. Located 4 hours' drive from Helsinki, the Finnish capital, Igor Kezaev's island, Kotasaari, is about 20 hectares. It's located in one of the most remote areas of the country and is a source of concern to neighbors. Marie-Anne lives a stone's throw from the billionaire's estate.
Vähän tietenkin jonkinlaista voi olla pelkoa mahdollisesti, ketä tänne tuleekaan, mitä siellä on, missä.
Marie-Anne often comes to walk her dog on the only access road to the island of Kezaev, but today it's impossible to go any further.
Seppo, sinne ei saa mennä. Ei saa mennä sinne. Tuu pois. Ei saa mennä, kato kun tässä lukee. Ei saa mennä. Kyllä ihmiset tänä päivänä pitää ovet kiinni, mutta tämmöiset esteet on vierasta.
The billionaire also had video surveillance cameras installed. A profusion of resources that raises questions among the inhabitants. What is such a rich man doing here?
Joku juttuhan silloin on ollut. No sitä miettii itsekin, että mitä, ei se tee mitään. Täällä on paljon kauniimpia paikkoja Saimaalla, mistä hän olisi voinut.
To get an idea of the size of the island and the extent of the construction, we use a drone. In the middle of the trees, we discover 4 wooden buildings, one of which is 500 meters squared and the other is over 400 meters squared. What could be behind such a large property owned by a man close to the Russian Secret Service? A Finn who works with the defense forces in his country asked to meet us. He has a second home a few kilometers from the island of Kisaev.
Ja uskon myös, että se liittyy siihen, että jos tilanne eskaloituu sodaksi täällä Pohjolassa, kun katsotaan tuota Suomen karttaa ja miten tiestöt ja vesistöt Venäjältä Sisä-Suomeen lähtee, niin on keskeisessä kohdassa tämä kyseinen saari niihin toimintoihin nähden. Se on tämän Suomen sisävesien suurimman syväväylän varressa. Siitä käsi on helppo tehdä erilaisia vaikka erikoisoperaatioita niin vesistöllä kuin maa-alueella.
The island of Kutasari is in fact located close to the country's defense line in case of an invasion by Russia. It's therefore ideally placed to spy on the movements of Finnish troops on one side and guide Russian troops on the other. The island could therefore serve as a rear base for Russian intelligence. Thanks to our drone, we also discover that the oligarch had a gigantic private heliport built in the heart of the forest, surrounded by mounds of earth several meters high. In Helsinki, an investigative journalist obtained the construction plans, and what he discovered is worthy of a spy movie.
Here's the document that Mr. Kesayev sent to local officials in Puumala, but one thing is missing. Here you can see a road, there's a platform, there's a small sauna, and there is, on this map, there's only forest. But in reality, heliport is located here.
Lauri sends an aerial photo of the site to his contacts in the army.
They right away answered that no doubt it was built by military standards. There is only one secured road to the main spot. There are thick walls around the spot so that it is impossible to shoot from the ground level to the heliport. The guy who has planned this, has a good sense of humor or has something bad on his mind.
Thanks to his sources, the journalist can also confirm that the Finnish Secret Service is also interested in the island.
Our military intelligence had doubts that Mr. Kesayev or whoever behind this project had deployed intelligence equipment to the island.
The Finnish Secret Service then carried out several surveillance flights. The plane was photographed by Igor Kesayev's neighbor.
The Finnish government definitely wants to send a signal to Moscow, don't mess with us, this is enough. We have a red line. We don't accept hostile intelligence in Finland, and we are ready to respond.
The Finnish government refuses to give details on the special operation. Lauri was only able to gain information as the oligarch used his European passport to sign the sale deed.
Cyprus nationality, right here. Nothing about his Russian citizenship.
Indeed, if he had used his Russian passport, the billionaire would have had to have his project validated by the Finnish Ministry of Defense. For the European Hybrid Threat Analysis Center, these strategic real estate purchases are sponsored by the Russian government.
Well, hypothetically, it's possible that such an investment be used by state actors in activity damaging Finland's or EU's or NATO's interests. We know that the regimes in authoritarian states can issue orders that have to be followed by private owners and companies. And this is especially the case, obviously, with the Russian oligarchs, whose position is dependent on the leadership of the country.
Russian oligarchs are even said to be a key part of the Putin system. The master of the Kremlin gives them orders and no one dares to disobey.
Ces dernières semaines, ces 6 hommes d'affaires russes ont été retrouvés morts. À chaque fois, les similitudes sont troublantes.
Indeed, since the beginning of the Ukrainian crisis, a wave of strange suicides among oligarchs has risen questions. Sergei Protosenya was found hanging from a rope in his villa in Spain. His wife and daughter dead, slashed with a knife. Alexander Zubotin died in his shaman's house, poisoned by toad venom. Alexander Chulyakov, the deputy director of the oil giant Lukoil, was found hanged. Ravil Maganov, the chairman of the company's board of directors, defenestrated while in hospital. Lukoil's management had openly opposed the war. In all, some 15 oligarchs have died in a suspicious manner. Of the 30 people we contacted for this film, all refused our requests for an interview. Only the ex-wife of Mikhail Friedman, a 13 billion euro Russian billionaire under sanctions, agreed to meet us. Olga Aziman met us in Neuilly-sur-Seine and confirms that she's worried about her ex-husband, who dared to express doubts about the Kremlin's policy in Ukraine.
C'est vrai que moi j'ai très peur pour lui. Ça veut dire que je voudrais surtout pas qu'il lui arrive quelque chose en lisant toujours que on trouve les hommes russes de business morts, pendus, je sais pas quoi. Vous voyez, ça me fait très très peur.
According to Olga, Mikhail Friedman did not particularly like the Russian president or his policies.
Du moment que Poutine est arrivé au pouvoir, tout de suite il a voulu quitter la Russie. Vous voyez, parce que c'est un homme qui, pour lui, la liberté, c'est le plus important. Il est parti de régime parce qu'il n'était pas tout à fait... En fait, il n'était pas du tout d'accord avec l'annexion de la Crimée.
Mikhail Friedman now lives in London. The dramatic deaths of these oligarchs under strange circumstances are very similar to the tragedy Natalia experienced. Natalia is the widow of Valery, a successful Russian businessman who opposed the methods of the Russian government.
Это мы в Финляндии. Валера был очень увлечен рыбной ловлей и очень это любил. Валера очень любил кататься на лыжах. Он ездил очень хорошо. Даже черные трассы были ему под силу.
But one morning, the Russian secret services came and took Valery away. They had come to ask the company director for a large sum of money.
Предложили заплатить деньги за крышевание бизнеса.
A few days later, the Russian authorities announced to the family that Valery had hanged himself in his cell. A story she doesn't believe. Before his death, Valery was working with his son on a big project he had just signed.
Сахара, да? Нет? Да?
Он получил заказ от Министерства обороны на произведение и создание трехмерных моделей. И наша задача компании Navidpro была создать полностью настоящую визуализацию подводной лодки со всеми встроенными внутренними исполнительными механизмами, деталями, объектами.
A big public money contract theoretically worth 12 million euros.
И вот в какой-то момент к нему пришли лица из ФСБ России и сказали о том, что очень хороший у вас контракт на большую сумму. И как у нас принято, деньги, значит, такие контракты необходимо давать откат, взятки. Они требовали для начала 1,5 миллиона евро.
Valery's family managed to obtain a second medical examination of the body in Russia.
Вот удары на спине. Вот удары тут по виску. Очень много следов, значит, от электроударов по всему телу, по языку, по небу, по губам, по телу, на кончиках пальцев суммих, по-моему, 28. Руки все изрезаны, вот на пальцах вот следы вот эти вот, здесь вот на запястьях, так что разорваны все вены. И как нам, значит, рассказывают следователи, что после всех вот этих вот того, что он пытался якобы сделать суицид с собой.
The autopsy report also mentions traces of semen in Valery's anus and mouth. Sperm was found in the rectal and oral cavity swab.
Мы когда получили эту экспертизу, мы, наверное, месяца 2 ее читали. Я говорю, я больше 2 страниц в день я не могла прочитать. Это потому что это зверство, его невозможно ничем не оправдать, не знаю, кто это мог делать, это какие-то звери просто.
The Russian secret services and their ultra-violent methods are said to be at the heart of the Putin system. In the southwest of France, in Biarritz, a man knows the ins and outs of the business and has arranged to meet us near this lighthouse. The Russian president is particularly fond of this city.
Это вилла Альтамира. Это одна из самых дорогих, самых красивых и респектабельных вилл в Биаррице. И не случайно и эта вилла, это одни из самых красивых вилл региона, их купили для семьи Владимира Путина. Это прекрасный подарок, и, к сожалению, просто он был сделан за счет денежных средств, похищенных у Российской Федерации.
For Vladimir Osechkin, a political refugee under police protection, the FSB racket is institutionalized and businessmen who don't collaborate with the authorities risk their lives.
И нету ни одного предприятия, какой-то золотой там шахты с золотом или с бриллиантами, или какой-то скважины нефти и газа, которую бы Путин и его окружение не контролировали, и с которой бы они не зарабатывали, и его окружение. Те, кто отказывается с ними работать, отправляются в тюрьму и там погибают.
The human rights defender was also arrested and tortured in Russia. The FSB had come to ask him for money. Since his escape, he has accumulated hundreds of documents on the Kremlin's actions.
Объектами наших расследований стал целый ряд полковников и генералов МВД, ФСИН и ФСБ. И, по сути дела, мы пришли к пониманию того, что
Пытки и коррупция носят системный характер, и это та система, которая согласована с самого верху, и речь шла о причастности первых лиц России, в том числе руководства ФСБ и Владимира Путина, к этим страшным преступлениям.
For denouncing these crimes, Vladimir regularly receives death threats. The activist managed to get hundreds of shocking pieces of evidence about Russia. The images are unbearable to look at.
Берут палки разных диаметров и вставляют их в задний проход человеку, унижая, подвергая очень серьезным физическим страданиям и очень часто разрывая кишечник и повреждая внутренние органы человека. И эта реальность снималась на служебные видеорегистраторы Федеральной службы исполнения наказания, и эти пытки происходили под контролем ФСБ.
According to Vladimir, the Russian president and the secret services directly control the oligarchs.
Очень важно понимать, что олигархи — это назначенные Владимиром Путиным доверенные люди, кому он позволил стать миллиардерами, кому он дал возможность обогатиться за счет бюджета Российской Федерации. И, по сути дела, это такая масштабная спецоперация по выводу денежных средств из бюджета Российской Федерации в карманы к тем людям, которые связаны с Владимиром Путиным.
For Vladimir, the Putin years are a big step backwards.
По сути дела, олигархи украли не просто деньги. Олигархи и Путин украли светлое демократичное будущее России и отбросили нашу страну на десятилетия назад. И теперь еще пытаются каким-то образом воссоздать Советский Союз в версии 2.0 с ГУЛАГом и КГБ.
A few weeks after this interview, Vladimir was the victim of an assassination attempt at his home, and a criminal investigation was opened. Faced with the economic cost of the conflict, the European Union is no longer so unanimous on tightening sanctions. In early October, during the vote on an 8th round of restrictions, Belgium abstained, a first